Through almost all of two-wheeled history, motorcycles appeared and functioned mostly the same. Your typical big, top-of-the-line touring or sporting motorcycle from, say, the 1930s to the 1950s to even the 70s, they weren't really that different in terms of form, and the changes that are obvious are really just small improvements to the function of the machine. You know, things like larger gas tanks, better ergonomics, and really just bigger everything. Today, however, your average motorcycle out on the road, though still just a frame, an engine, and a gas tank attached to two wheels, really looks very little like motorcycles from the past, and the go-to top-of-the-line flagship do-it-all motorcycles from most of today's manufacturers appears very little like that same kind of motorcycle from, say, 50 years ago. The adventure bike has taken over the market, and in many ways for good reason. These motorcycles are comfortable, practical, capable, do-it-all machines, and though they may not be quite as pretty as the bikes that came before them, they sure do work. But how did we get here? Well, it all goes back to one motorcycle, the BMW R80 GS. As one of the most significant, if not the most significant motorcycles of the past 50 or so years, you would be forgiven for thinking that the BMW GS would have had some sort of grand entrance into the motorcycle market, maybe something like the Honda CB750 or Kawasaki Ninja. But that really wasn't the case. It's not that riders and journalists alike weren't impressed or excited about this bike. It's just that this was a truly new kind of motorcycle, so different from anything that had come before it, it would take a bit of time for the general public as a whole to dive all the way in. To sum it up, the original GS was nothing short of a surprise. Through the 1970s, the idea of a motorcycle that could be completely capable both on and off-road was still somewhat new. Sure, motorcyclists had seen a glimpse of what was possible with the likes of the Yamaha DT1 and the four-stroke Honda XL250, and then later on the Yamaha XT500. Most figured that this was about as big as a capable off-roader could get, any bigger, and that part of the enduro formula, the off-road part, would really start to be lost. These motorcycles were enduros though. They weren't at all what we would consider modern adventure bikes, but they are the precursors to this whole segment. At this time, BMW wasn't exactly developing motorcycles for the dirt. Mostly they made large capacity touring bikes, and they were doing that better than most. Hence the reason they'd survived the 70s, while the British motorcycle industry was well on its way out at this point. But BMW really needed something new, as the Big Four from Japan continued to take over literally every single portion of the market with their reliable advanced machines, including BMW's bread and butter, which was the touring segment. Though the company wasn't exactly known for making dirt bikes, BMW did have ongoing experience in off-road trials and enduro races. Those successes, though, were coming from customized bikes from BMW's street lineup. They weren't really off-road motorcycles built from the ground up. However, a change in class designation for these races opened the door for BMW to try just that. And it came through a partnership with the Italian manufacturer Laverda. At this time, BMW and Laverda had a, shall we call it, friendly manufactorial friendship. They would often send each other test bikes to test, and their lineups really didn't overlap, so it worked. BMW commissioned Laverda to make a competition off-roader with the Boxer Twin as the power plan. And this was all following a change in the Enduro Championship rules. By 1977, 2 prototypes were underway using the R60 Boxer engine, bored out to 800 cc's. Many features of these bikes would be present in some way in the later R80 GS. At the same time, BMW's head of testing, Laszlo Perez, was building his own experimental BMW Enduro, and that bike would really be kind of the father or maybe grandfather of what would become the GS. At this time, the motorcycle division at BMW was on the brink of extinction for a second time. And between these models, which were raced in the Enduro series, and the ongoing struggles, BMW decided that the path forward would be a big production enduro based somewhat on what Perez had made. They needed something quick, as their advanced 3 and 4 cylinder K series wasn't even close to being done. They had to build this new motorcycle mostly out of already existing parts, and mainly it would need to be powered by their current Boxer engine. The goal with this new motorcycle was a very BMW take on what a trail bike or enduro could be. It would need to be a true trail bike, thoroughly capable off-road, like the new race-ready enduro bikes, but it would need to retain BMW's characteristic comfort and touring capability. That was really their place in the market, and there was no reason to leave that behind and make just another dirt bike. The company started with a works racer, prophetically named the GS 800. These bikes were primarily based on Perez's experimental enduro, and though in form they look quite a bit like the production GS, they were quite different. Still, they proved incredibly capable in very difficult testing. 2 prototypes of the GS 800 were taken for testing early in 1980, and to really see how capable these bikes were, they took them on a 1,600-mile journey through South America, from the smoldering Amazon rainforest all the way up to 16,000 feet in the Andes. And the bikes took it all like a complete champ, and BMW knew that they had something special on their hands. For the production GS, that is the R80 GS, they decided to depart from the factory enduro race bikes in developing this new bike and instead looked to the R80 street bike as really a starting point. The simple air-cooled engine made an ideal 50 horsepower, but for the GS they made a few changes both to the engine and clutch, which simultaneously shaved lots of weight but also added to the reliability. Coming out from the engine, the GS was basically an entirely different bike from the road-going R80. From the twin-loop steel tubular frame off of the R65 and R45, but with a new form of rear suspension that they called monolever. Essentially, it was a single-sided swing arm, but with a shaft drive. To the all-new massive 4-gallon fuel tank, the front forks came straight off the R100/7. On the one hand, it was truly a parts bin motorcycle, and it also was loaded with plastic, which is also something very different from motorcycles of, say, the late 70s. As an off-road motorcycle, it was still quite heavy, but in comparison with other road-going bikes, including BMW's R80, it was really light, and in many ways this formula for adventure riding would turn the enduro formula on its head. Bikes like the DT1 were really the opposite. They showed the world that a capable off-roader could make a decent on-roader, and that the older formula of taking street bikes and turning them into scramblers, think something like a Triumph TR6, just really didn't work all that well. But with the BMW GS, they did exactly that, but thanks to advancements in suspension, this heavy motorcycle may not have been a motocrosser, but it did work pretty well off-road. The bike was made to be serviceable with its shaft drive, and perhaps most innovative, again, this new single-sided swing arm. It had easily removable plastics. This really was an innovative new kind of motorcycle. In September of 1980, the new R80 GS was unveiled to the world. From the beginning, it was somewhat divisive. Most were excited or at least intrigued by this bike. Regardless, this was clearly a new kind of motorcycle altogether, one that would change the face of motorcycling forever. Though the company couldn't have ever predicted its massive success and influence, they knew this was something radically new and different from anything else out there, and they advertised it that way. The BMW R80 GS is the key to a whole new world of two-wheeled transportation. It's the first ever opportunity to enjoy the fun and practical value of quite different motorcycling categories with a single machine. They used terms like adventure touring in their promotions, and the press ate it up. Orders came pouring in, and early testers loved it. The December issue of The Motorcyclist for 1980 says this: BMW has built not your common run-of-the-mill dual-purpose machine, but rather a full-fledged street machine which can occasionally dabble in the off-road world, and with that the GS offers unique and exciting opportunities in a whole new world of riding, a field which it contests with virtually no rivals. Thanks to its lightweight form, journalists found its sweet spot was really as a tourer, but a different kind of touring bike, one that you're not afraid to get dirty or, take on an occasional dirt or gravel road. It certainly didn't hurt that early in 1981, BMW's works team won the Paris-Dakar Rally. That year, 1 in 5 BMWs sold were GSs. The GS was a fantastic solution for BMW's struggles, especially in terms of competition. They needed a world beater at this point. They needed a bike that would stand out, a motorcycle that would sell in droves and ultimately achieve a sort of cult following, which it obviously did. But the GS also created more of the same problem. As this new kind of motorcycle made a whole new segment in the market altogether, it would lead to quite a few copies, or at least attempts to make a motorcycle in the same spirit. Think bikes like the Africa Twin and even, the KLR 650. BMW had to continue to innovate. They couldn't rest on their laurels, and the GS and its eventual line of motorcycles would be the place for them to do just that. Though the company has always been known for technical innovation on both the 2- and 4-wheeled side of production, I really feel that the GS forced BMW to become what they really are today. It took them from being quite a bit behind the Japanese manufacturers in terms of overall technological sophistication, to now really being a true leader in multiple areas. This new segment of adventure bikes and why they appealed to riders all over the world is pretty interesting to me. In developing the R80 GS, BMW did some research, polling those who rode production enduro motorcycles, and what they found was something that I suspect is still true today for those who ride adventure bikes. Of those studied, 98% of the time that enduro riders spent on their motorcycles was spent on-road rather than off-road. And this is where the brilliance of the GS line comes in. It's often the idea of adventuring, the possibility, the knowledge that if for some reason I need to take this thing off the pavement, I can. But in all reality, still today, I would imagine that even in the middleweight class where bikes like the T7 and even the KLR rule, I would imagine most of the time spent on these bikes is still spent on the pavement. I'm not entirely convinced that the adventure bike formula is desirable because these bikes are supposedly capable on and off road. For some reason, this segment from the original GS and on has just proven to have all sorts of benefits just for regular riding. You know, they're comfortable, they're reliable, they're powerful, they have massive gas tanks so you can just kind of ride and ride and ride. Today, they're also the platform of choice for many companies' best and newest technologies. These bikes are often also referred to as dad bikes, and no doubt the original GS spawned this movement. But here's the thing, sometimes dads know what's up. Dads don't care about how they look. They're not riding so people can look at them. They're riding because they simply want to ride. Now, I'm not saying there aren't adventure riders spending ridiculous amounts of money on these kinds of motorcycles with all the bells and whistles. And of course, something like a big, expensive GS today can be just as much a status symbol as, say, a Harley. Regardless, I've always respected what BMW does with the GS line. They seem to be focused on making motorcycles that are primarily for riding and riding a lot. I mean, if you asked pretty much anybody who knows what they're talking about, what bike you should ride across the country, there's a good chance they're going to mention the BMW GS. And as much as the appeal of the simplicity of that original GS is now somewhat gone, it's hard not to respect a manufacturer focused on making motorcycles that are built specifically for putting down serious miles. Now, I have to give a shout out to the primary source for this video, which is Phil West's amazing book called BMW GS: The Complete Story. Often when I make videos like this, I'll read through a book or a few books or articles, and they're often so long-winded and overly detailed. This book was just perfect. I loved reading it, and I cannot recommend it enough. If you want to learn more about the R80 GS, I have a link to that book in the description below, so you can check it out. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We just hit 100,000 subscribers, which is insane. So thanks for all the support and for really just watching my videos. All right, hope you all are doing well. We'll see you in the next one. Ride safe.